Today, I will be speaking on the article Effects of Personality and Gender on Fantasy Sports Game Participants, the moderating role of perceived knowledge. This article was very specific in the fact that it spoke on personality and gender, which I really haven't seen a lot in fantasy sports articles of how that affects participants in fantasy sports. And as stated in the article, this was looking for the role of gender, sensation seeking, locus of control, and need for cognition in predicting attitudes and intentions of fantasy sports game participants. No study has examined the relationship between participants' needs for stimulation and participation in fantasy games. This article focuses a lot on what's called NOC, which stands for the need for cognition, which pretty much relates to the amount of participation. The more you participate, the more you need to be cognizant of the fantasy sports, whatever sport that would be. It also focuses on LOC, which is the locus of control, which kind of has to do with a mental thing. Some people believe that if you're confident, you have more chance of winning in your team, even though you're not playing for your team, you're just picking who's going to play for you. And also, it compares a lot of males and females, and it says how males are more likely to participate in games of skill, according to a study. With the methodology of this article, there was a college sample because that's the most popular age for fantasy sports, and there was 244 participants ranging from age 19 to 37. There was 51% male, 49% female, 66% of the people were Caucasian, 42% were Asian American, and 25% were African American. It had three different types of questionnaires. You had the NFC, which is the need for cognition, which is an 18-item scale. You had the LOC, the locus of control, a 23-item questionnaire of yes or no. And you had the PFK, which is the perceived football knowledge, because it focused on fantasy football, which is a scale about confidence and knowledge of football. With the results after all of these questionnaires for these kids, they noticed that there was a big influence of perceived knowledge was stronger for the males. So the more that the males knew, influenced them more on their participation. The personality characteristics really affected how a male would participate, but it didn't really affect at all how if a female would participate in fantasy sports. The locus of control favored males. And for the football knowledge, they noticed that if you have football knowledge, it's greater than having gambling skills because there is skill required in fantasy sports. It's not just luck like regular gambling. And for the future research of this, the author wanted to see some trait impulsing and sport participation, the way they correlate, because people don't really talk about that. That if how you would if you played a sport, does that affect if you want to play fantasy sports? And also, how people are with multiple leagues and excessive financial involvements. So I feel this article did a pretty good job on speaking of gender and personality traits and how it affected if someone would play fantasy sports.